What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first story is from Zach Witzel, who works at Helium, which is, I guess, like a revenue cat slash Superwall competitor. And he has this thread that he released, which is really cool, which will show some design stuff that is being implemented into like these app to web flows, because Cal AI, which is an AI calorie tracker which got acquired by MyFitnessPal, was taken off the App Store today. It just got back on as of like an hour ago because they had this internal App Store pop-up that was showing for Stripe payments, so you could like bypass the Apple tax, which would be 15 to 30%. But after that went super viral, Apple actually took them down from the App Store. So you can see here they show like Duolingo and Tinder and all these apps, but basically you can see is that you have to have this like pay in app option. So you can see here for Tinder, like they have the subscribe with App Store option. So I think you always have to have that available, but if you press continue, then it takes you to an external web paywall where you can actually pay through Stripe, and you only have to pay like the 3% plus 30 cents fee. So pretty interesting. I don't know how these like designs get out to everyone. I guess like one person figures it out, or they figure out the rules that Apple's cool with, or they have an internal Apple person at the App Store who kind of tells them like how to build it. But it's just so interesting how you can see like all of them, like Hinge as well has the subscribe with App Store button, and it's just very interesting. I don't really have any live mobile apps right now that do in-app payments. The only mobile app I have right now does like Stripe only payments because it's not an in-app purchase. But still very interesting. Cal AI was down for about 2 days, I think, or maybe even 1 day, just today and yesterday, but now it's back up because they have the in-app purchases figured out. Okay, next we have this tweet from cal.com, which is an open source version of Calendly, if you've heard of them, which is like for booking meetings with companies, but cal.com is like the open source version as of yesterday. So they've actually switched off of open source. And basically their argument is that because of AI and like Mythos and these new models, Mythos is a Claude model that's coming out, or is like kind of in like general preview. Mythos is like this model from Anthropic that's like hidden right now. It's only available to like 8 big tech companies like Nvidia, Google, and a few others that apparently can find 0 days in like these really deep projects like FFmpeg and OpenBSD and a few others. So they feel that by having their code base open source, it actually really makes them vulnerable to these high scale attacks. And Pierre Rich, who is the CEO of cal.com, kind of posted this Venn diagram as well, where he was like, if you have centralized hosting, you have millions of users, and you're open source, that's kind of like the 3 circles, then you become really vulnerable to attacks. But they have cal.diy, which is like do it yourself, so you can self-host it. And he says like, then although you have an open source project which is used by millions of people, you don't have the centralized hosting, so it's not as big a risk. And same if it's not open source but you have centralized hosting and you have millions of people using it, then it's not at risk. So that's kind of their argument. But this guy Tiger Brody, who I thought was the founder of Spawn, but I guess he just worked there, and he also worked at Lovable, he's kind of clowning on them. He's like, the hilarious part is that they're probably the first open source project that'll get big time pwned if hackers want to have fun with it. Just close source it, go ham on security, and share this video much later, you know, after they've already like solved all these problems. But they just posted it out the gate. The interesting thing though about Cal is it's owned by this company called SS, which is commercial open source, and they kind of pioneered the idea of commercial open source, which is like open source software but you charge with a specific license for it. But I asked Pierre in one of his replies if he's still like working on that, if he's still investing in commercial open source or not, but I didn't get a reply, unfortunately. But still very interesting. And I don't know like how much open source is going to stay around. You know, that kind of wave of people closing off contributors to their projects, and now they're just hiding the source code in general. Kind of makes sense from a slop fork perspective, which is like, you know, hiding the test so that people can't just recreate your code with AI even if they don't use the IP itself. But then this is from a security perspective of vulnerabilities for live service products, where it is like if a 0 day gets found for cal.com and you can like convince people to, you know, download malware or something, then it definitely becomes problematic. So I understand where they're coming from, but we'll have to see what they say as they move forward. And the CEO was replying to a lot of tweets. He was kind of on some Guillermo vibes a little bit, but very interesting. And so next we have this tweet from Intercom. This is from the CTO of Intercom, saying 9 months ago they publicly committed to 2 timesing the productivity of their R&D org at Intercom, and it was scary. It wasn't always clear they'd pull it off, but they hit it with 3 months to spare. In fact, looking back 16 months, they've 3x'd, and here's what actually happened. So they kind of go through it. They're saying PRs per person across all of R&D is 3x, went from 16 per month to 33 per month, which is interesting. And they do mention that PRs aren't perfect, and they also say that they're down 35% downtime from breaking changes, and their AI spend is growing fast but actually declines in cost per PR, which is interesting. So 45% down from December, which was $1,400 per PR, now down to $600. So very interesting. And they say limiting token budgets is the expensive choice, which makes sense. You know, in an organization, you want to encourage your team to do as much token spend as possible, but they don't really specify how they manage to lower this cost. My guess is maybe being smarter about which models are being used for what, or as you can see here in this next part, that maybe they're just buying everyone the $200 Claude Code plan, because then you can run up $5,000 in usage. But it is interesting, like per PR, still definitely a lot of spend happening in tokens. You know, for me, like I probably spend like maybe $5 at most, like using a Code Rabbit or using a Codex review to review a PR, but but this is a lot. But I guess from a security perspective, you just want to run at it, and like it would be interesting to kind of know what these loops look like, if it's like Ralph loops that are, you know, just doing review, or if it's writing the code itself, and kind of how that's separated. And it's cool as well how they like connected to Fin, which is like their self-service model. So with Intercom now, you can like pay, I think it's like $1 per resolution, so it's actually free to use, but per resolution from the customer is what you pay for, and it's like usage based. And they were kind of the original people to say like, okay, we're gonna move from seat based to usage based, so just very interesting. And then we have this other tweet from Ryan Sherlock, which is similar, and he's the senior director of engineering at Intercom, and he just said using the PR as a metric seemed like a bad idea, but the reason why it's good is because it's an easy to understand metric, forcing them to find the actual limits of how they build. And he says, for example, agentic coding ramped up Intercom, and they started creating way more PRs, and their CI time and cost blew up, so the costs were increasing exponentially, and basically they found the bottleneck, they focused on it, and now it's the fastest and cheapest per test run that it's ever been. Okay, and then next we have a tweet from DHH. This is super fascinating because I remember when this was happening at the time and everyone was clowning on him. This was kind of when Vercel was really coming up, you know, and like serverless and stuff was becoming very, very popular. And obviously Lambda had innovated on serverless and kind of made it the de facto in the 2020s or even earlier. 2023, like Vercel and all these guys, Supabase, Neon, etc., were really starting to come up and become popular. 37 Signals and Basecamp, which is the company owned by DHH, who's the creator of Ruby on Rails as well, they decided that they were going to move to on-prem completely. So they were going to take all of their stuff off AWS, and I think even S3 alone, which is like the file storage on AWS, was costing them millions of dollars per year. And I think they had like a long-term contract that was about to expire, so instead of renewing their contract, they decided to move to on-prem. So he has this breakdown, which is super fascinating. Like he has kind of been vindicated in hindsight. So he says in 2023, we spent $4 million on AWS plus other hosting. In 2026, their hosting and support bill is down to $1 million a year due to the cloud exit. Even including all the hardware buying, they've already saved $4 million by the end of this year. And going forward is $3 million a year in savings. And they also say, just as a reminder, we didn't grow the team at all. Same crew who ran the cloud now run it all on-prem. They ditched Kubernetes though and deploy everything through Kamal, which is interesting. I'm not too tapped into what that is, if that's built internally through them or if that's an open source project that they're utilizing. So yeah, that is a project that they built, which is very interesting. Kind of interesting. Like it would be cool to see some interviews, like maybe from the engineers who were working on this, like how they migrated from like cloud engineers, which does require a lot of sophisticated knowledge. Like it's not like, you know, plug and play like Vercel. Building stuff on AWS definitely requires a lot of like very specific knowledge, and is a lot of like cloud, and not even cloud, but a lot of like hosting and infrastructure knowledge that I understand why it would be able to be moved over to on-prem stuff, but still very interesting and very impressive. And also impressive that they built their own Kubernetes replacement. Their uptime is also improved. If you go to the website, it actually looks really solid, you know, compared to something like Claude, where obviously these guys are a Web 2 company, like they don't have the GPU problem, but still very interesting how good their status is considering it's all on-prem. And I think I did see somewhere in the replies as well that they have like an active with CISO. Kevin Naughton asked, now that everything is on-prem, do you have multiple locations for failover? And they have 2 main data centers, 1 EU satellite deployment, and a 4th one coming online shortly.